What's up, heathens? How ya doing? Today we're going to be talking about this video.
Is there any good evidence to believe that in the resurrection of Jesus Christ?
Absolutely. There's 75% of New Testament scholars today do take very seriously the gospel accounts about the last week of the life of Jesus.
So yes, we're going to be talking about the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. This is obviously going to be heavily biased evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. They will tout a bunch of secular people as agreeing with them, but I can guarantee you that even Bart Ehrman thinks their particular evidence is bullshit. So we're going to find out how exactly it's bullshit today. If you want to know more about this bullshit, then please stay tuned. Now we're getting into the video. Oh god damn, Jesus' dick is getting in there quick tonight.
Welcome to the Third Degree. My name is Sule Prince, and I'm here with Dr. Tony Costa. Dr. Costa, we know that Easter is a special month in the Christian calendar, and it's based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we know that without the resurrection, there is no Christianity. Is there any good evidence to believe that in the resurrection of Jesus Christ?
I'm going to stop this guy right before he answers because that's how I roll here on this channel. The whole idea behind if Jesus never resurrected, then Christianity is done for, that actually comes from Paul. If you look up in Paul's writings, he legit says that if the resurrection didn't happen, then Christianity's bunk. But see, the problem is that even Paul didn't think that like Jesus had actually resurrected here on earth. Like Paul got all of his information from scriptures. So the idea that he resurrected from the grave in order to atone for sins actually comes from the Old Testament.
Absolutely. There's 75% of New Testament scholars today do take very seriously the gospel accounts about the last week of the life of Jesus. And the gospels they've been called passion accounts with extended introductions because the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are the earliest biographies we have on Jesus from the first century, they focus most of their attention on the events leading to his death and then what happens after his death.
What he's talking about here isn't exactly true. Of course, the first gospel is Mark. That was written first, but even Mark was written after Paul, who had set up the entire idea of Jesus resurrecting from the dead and all that, and he got that from scriptures. Mark itself even suggests that it gets its information from scriptures because it starts off, the very first few lines of Mark actually starts off with a prophecy from Isaiah. So he's talking about these things as if they were like separate individual accounts. But to consider the Gospels, really what you need to consider is Mark and John. Mark is the earliest gospel, like I said before, but also Matthew and Luke copy from Mark. Luke seems to copy from both Mark and Matthew. And then John is a completely separate Christianity that was working about that time. There were multiple Jewish sects at the time that Christianity was evolving into the religion that it is today. John is representative of kind of one of those groups out there that was kind of, I don't know, they didn't follow the mainstream, but they were large enough of a group to be included in the canonical Gospels. So, now that all that's explained, we'll let him answer.
So there's 5 basic historical points that the overwhelming majority of scholars will hold to about Jesus of Nazareth. So let me enumerate them for you. Number 1, they believe that Jesus died on a Roman cross in the first century.
And this is what scholars hold to?
Yes, absolutely. There's no doubt about this. In fact, even atheist scholars grant that Jesus died. The only ones who deny this are those who would deny Jesus existed as a historical person.
Okay.
Well, no, that's not even true because Muslims say that Jesus didn't actually die, or at least that he didn't raise from the dead. I think that they even go as far as to say that he didn't die on the cross. So it's not just mythicists who deny Jesus' existence say that. There's also plenty of scholars out there that do, if you need that kind of evidence, but it really should be the evidence that you look at and not like authorities in the field. Like, it's good to get your information from authorities, but if the information sounds suspicious or there's a reason for the authorities to be biased in one way or another, you need to question it. Just like, for instance, Moses. At one time, we legit thought that Moses was a real person who wrote the first 5 books of the Torah. But through archaeological evidence and other evidence throughout history, we have found Moses to just be a character in the book that was used in order to tell a story. And that is the majority of scholars now, versus before when you had people that thought that he was a real person and they were scholars in their field and all this other stuff. So it literally is just a matter of time before people come around to the idea. At least that's what I feel. If you wanted to take this out of the realm of like mythicism and shit, you could go to the medical field with germ theory. Prior to germ theory, people thought all kinds of crazy things got you sick, and they did not consider that microscopic organisms were the things that were making you sick. But then Louis Pasteur did experiments, showed that germs exist, and it wasn't immediately that it just, it became the consensus. He had to fight long and hard and over several decades, and even multiple other people had to join in the fight to push for germ theory. And once that was accepted, it's like, oh, how did we fucking even, Jesus Christ, why the fuck did we do all that? Leeches? Do you remember when we would leech fucking people?
Even that, we're dealing with a very fringe minority that is not taken seriously by the bulk of New Testament scholarship today and history.
Fuck New Testament scholarship. Most of New Testament scholars are Christian, or they are biased towards the Christian worldview. So, of course, they're going to believe not only that Jesus existed, but also that he rose from the dead. I just want that to sink in real quick, that these New Testament scholars who say that Jesus existed also say that he rose, a dead body rose from the dead magically by the force of God. And that's proven historically.
Historians in other disciplines. So, number one, Jesus died by crucifixion on a Roman cross about the year 33, somewhere between 30 to 33 AD. The second area of agreement is that Jesus received a burial. Some would call it an honorable burial, where a disciple of Jesus by the name of Joseph of Arimathea took it upon himself to give his master an honorable burial, which would indicate that the site of Jesus' tomb was known to both foe and friend alike.
Okay, so the point that I want to make here about these things is that those are not grounded in anything other than the gospel. And since we only have Mark, and Paul never mentions Jesus being buried in a tomb or anything like that, Paul only mentions that he did die and that he rose again. He never mentions a tomb. So it's pretty much Mark that is saying that he was buried in a tomb, right? These people are taking one source, biased as fuck, and saying that it proves it to be true. This is not how you should do historical scholarship. And if it was anything other than Jesus, they would call bullshit on it.
It was Joseph's own personal family tomb that he placed Jesus' body in. So what this would indicate is that they knew the location of the tomb of Jesus. This is important, that he wasn't just thrown into a common grave with a whole bunch of other criminals.
There's no way that you can know that. If Jesus existed and if he was crucified on a cross, then I think that the Romans wouldn't give a fuck. I don't think that the Romans would treat his family special or his friends special. I think they would have plucked his ass right off that cross and thrown him in the open grave where all the other people would have been thrown. Now, if you want to make an argument that they later back rustled through all the dead bodies and then took his body somewhere else, I mean, maybe I can't disprove that, but you're also making an assumption, like an unfounded assumption, and that just hurts your case.
So the third one is the discovery of the empty tomb. So according to the Gospels, 3 days following the death of Jesus, a number of his women disciples came to anoint his body, which was a very common Jewish custom to anoint the body of the dead. And they found, to their amazement, that the door to the tomb was opened, and they found that the tomb was empty. Scholars agree that the tomb was empty. The evidence is so overwhelming. There's multiple attestation to back this up within the Gospels themselves.
Okay, so no, there's not multiple attestations to it. There is one attestation. That's Mark. All the other Gospels came way after that, so you can't rely on them being independent from Mark. Definitely not Matthew and Luke, so you really only have Mark there. I love how you don't mention these facts because you consider Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John to be written by the disciples or the apostles or whoever is supposedly writing these things. But they weren't written by eyewitnesses. So you really only have Mark that says that the tomb was open. And even then, you have a later author coming in and adding an extension to the end of Mark that has Jesus appearing to the women on the road back to the disciples. So what do you really have? You have the ladies coming, finding the stone is come off of it, not because there's multiple attestations, but because Mark is the only one saying it. Of course, the historians aren't going to say, oh, of course Jesus appeared out of fucking nowhere. But there's also no evidence to suggest that Jesus was buried in a tomb or that anything in the Bible actually happened, like as far as the Gospels go. And there's another layer to this because the Gospels have different stories for who and how the tomb was found to be open. Because in Mark, you just have, I believe it was two ladies maybe coming to the tomb, finding the rock rolled away, and Jesus wasn't inside. So they left screaming. And then Matthew has the ladies coming in there and finding a young boy angel in there and telling them that Jesus has risen again and all this other stuff. And then you got Luke, who fucking pulls out a Michael fucking Bay, has an angel descend from the heavens, shock the fuck out of the goddamn cover stone, blowing it away like he's got a fucking Hummer that's like crashing fucking out of it like Michael Bay would have. And then the angel sets its ass on top of the broken ass stone, telling the ladies, he has come, or he has risen, and all this other shit. And then that's it. And then the angel goes back up in heaven. I mean, you're not telling us how different these recollections are. The fact that there are different recollections of how many women were even at the fucking tomb. Who was at the tomb? Because you have, in one case, there were no fucking guards. Then in another case, there were 2 guards. So no, this isn't just, multiple attestations. This is one attestation and then some elaborations on it with one guy who's a fucking special effects artist.
And even outside the Gospels. And the tomb was empty, there is no doubt. So the question is now, what happened to the body of Jesus? Because dead men don't rise.
Yeah.
The death rate is still 1 per person. And therefore, we know that when someone dies and they're clinically dead, their heart has stopped, their brain waves have stopped, we know that dead matter cannot regenerate itself. Once you lose all oxygen to the brain, to the heart, and so forth, you are pronounced clinically dead.
I would like to point out here that people that are pronounced clinically dead have come back in the past, especially before modern medicine was really going. You have multiple reports of people being buried alive. I'm just saying that even people that have been clinically dead for a few minutes have come back to life. Obviously, what you're saying isn't true.
And so the fourth point of agreement that scholars hold to, again, the overwhelming majority, at least 75% of scholars, is that the disciples of Jesus experienced what scholars call post-mortem appearances, meaning that they saw Jesus alive again after his death, where he
Okay, so this comes from Paul. Paul, of course, got his information from the scriptures, from the Septuagint or the Torah. What he did was he interpreted these prophecies and then translated them into his own particular gospel that he was spreading. Part of the Pauline Creed is to say that Jesus died according to the scriptures, and then he rose on the 3rd day according to the scriptures, and then he was seen by all these people. But see, the thing that this guy right here isn't telling you is the fact that Paul, he felt that the only person that could be considered an apostle of Jesus would be those that witnessed him after he came back from the dead. So it doesn't matter what happened before Jesus died. All it mattered was what happened after he died and he rose again. And it's all from the scriptures or from Revelation. And that is all Paul gets from it. So basically you have a crazy guy saying that, 500 people saw the risen Jesus. And then this guy is saying, well, that's solidified in fucking history right there. Why don't we pack all this shit up and go home, guys? Jesus is risen and he is Lord, motherfucker. And then at that point, Jesus flips the hell switch and he goes straight to hell for cursing.
He appeared to them individually. He appeared to groups of people. At one time, we're told he appeared to 500 believers at one time. He appeared to skeptics like his brother James, who didn't believe in him. He also appeared to foes like Saul of Tarsus, who was a persecutor of the church and then was also known by the name Paul. We have to step back and say, okay, maybe it was a hallucination. They hallucinated seeing Jesus alive. Well, a hallucination does not explain an empty tomb.
Yeah.
You can hallucinate a dead person being alive again, but their body is still in the tomb.
Yeah.
But the tomb is empty. They see Jesus, but then you have a problem with the number of people. There are groups of people who saw Jesus alive. Now, the question is, if it was a hallucination, I can understand an individual hallucinating, but to have a group of people hallucinating the same thing at the same time, or even 500 people hallucinating the same thing at the same time, is really grasping at straws.
Yeah.
You know what's grasping at straws right here? The whole idea that Paul should just be instantly trusted about, 500 people seeing a risen Christ, when he's obviously seeing things. He's obviously a schizotypal person. So you think, let me get this straight, you think that it's more probable that he wasn't personally hallucinating all of this shit and just saying 500 people saw it, rather than, oh, he's schizotypal, he imagined all of this shit. Like, which one is a little bit more convincing, or not convincing, but more probable? Which one's more probable? Because you don't actually have 500 accounts of this. You have one account from Paul, and all you have from that is 500 people saw the risen Christ. Like, that's it. If I were to go to a police station and been like, yep, 500 people saw this guy rise from the dead, I mean, nobody would believe me. But hell, you add Jesus to the mix, and of course people believe you in the first century.
Hallucinations are subjective phenomena that occur in the brain where we project images into reality that are not really there. They're not objective. They're subjective based on what we see in our minds.
True. This guy is, and Sean in the comments there actually said that yes, 500 people can have a mass hallucination. A good bit of evidence for that is actually the dancing sun in the sky thing in Portugal. Like, there was a lot of people there that saw the sun dancing in the sky, and we all know that the sun can't fucking dance in the sky. I mean, mass hallucinations can happen, and I think that you can have individual hallucinations, but I mean, if you just look at faith healers and all these mega churches and whatnot, who have these people that have the guy with the coat and he slings his coat at the crowd and the entire crowd falls down, the entire crowd will tell you that they felt the force of God on them, but it didn't actually happen. It didn't, there was no force of God. They hallucinated God's being washing over them and shit.
Brain, so forth. But when groups of people are seeing Jesus alive again, and he's tangible, they could touch him, they hear him, he eats food in front of them. This is what convinced them that not only was the tomb empty, but that he was truly before them. He was tangible, he ate food. This is what really confirmed to them that Jesus was risen dead.
Okay, and still, you only have Paul's account for that. You can't trust Mark's account to be independent from Paul's. So all you have is Paul's account that 500 people saw him, also the disciples saw him. And even if you want to consider Mark's to be independent from Paul, you still only have one source that is saying that particular thing.
And then number 5, scholars regard these four points leading up to the 5th point, that this was the origin of the Christian way. In other words, what got the Christian church, what jump-started the church, were these realities. Jesus died, buried, his tomb was discovered empty, he appeared alive to his disciples, and this is what got them going. This is what was the catalyst that got the Christian movement going.
So he's basically totally forgetting about other religions in the past. There have been other religions where they've had shit that didn't happen, but yet they are still religion. Like, they got going one way or another. So the whole idea that Jesus died and he rose again didn't actually have to happen in order for people to believe it. People can believe things that aren't real. Like, for instance, in today's world, some people believe that vaccinations cause autism because of a shitty scientific paper that was done back in the 90s, and now they think that vaccines cause autism, even though that paper's been debunked time and time again. The fact that people can believe things that aren't necessarily true, like this guy would say of Muslims that believe Allah got his information from some fucking archangel that told him he could fuck a 9-year-old, he wouldn't believe that guy was true and correct in what he believes. So obviously people can believe in things that are not real.
And so when you look at this from an academic point of view, not just a religious point of view, there are academics who look at these, what we call the minimal facts of the life of Jesus. When we look at these things, we have to ask ourselves, yourself, so what leads a non-Christian scholar to the conclusion that these 5 points are historically valid? Well, because the evidence is so overwhelming.
Yes.
I have to contest the non-Christian scholar agreeing that Jesus rose from the dead, because I don't see a non-Christian scholar agreeing that Jesus rose from the dead. Like, for instance, Bart Ehrman. He's a historical Christ person, and he has argued against like Mike Licona, who was pushing that Jesus did raise from the dead with the same shitty kind of evidence that you're presenting here. But Bart Ehrman doesn't think that Jesus rose from the dead. He casts just as much doubt as I cast on the existence of Jesus. So you can't sit there and tell me that these non-Christian scholars out there, anonymous fucking scholars, they believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I mean, I remember there was that one girl that claimed to be a non-Christian, which I don't see why I should doubt her. I did a video on her. She did one of those drawing board things. She said that she doesn't think that Jesus rose from the dead, but obviously the apostles and James and Paul and all them saw something that convinced them. And so they leave it up to these vague assertions that they had to see something. And I'm sorry, but you could say that somebody saw something in the night sky and was abducted by aliens. And it's like, I don't know what happened, but they saw something that caused them to get their asses probed. See, what this whole video boils down to is an appeal to authority. And that's the exact thing that he's been doing this entire time. I don't know if you guys remember, but every time he brought up a point, he made sure to reinforce that 75 or more % of scholars believe this to be true, therefore it is true. It shouldn't be, the scholars believe this is true, therefore it's true. It should be, oh, these scholars say this is true, and the evidence backs them up and makes sense. It's always the evidence that proves it true. When I want to, refute somebody about climate change being a false thing, I don't appeal to scientists that have done the work. I don't appeal to the actual scientists that wrote the papers. I appeal to the evidence. I know you guys probably heard me before, but I appealed to the evidence of, our oceans warming up, the Earth's temperature raising, the fact that to reach an equilibrium, our global temperature has to raise even more. And these are just facts that have been proven and that makes logical sense. Thank you, heathens, for making it to the end. Have you left your comment down below with what you thought about their evidence for a historical resurrection of Jesus? No? Well then go down below and let me know what you think right now. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of mythicist content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice, and I will see you heathens later.